Congress allocated $43.4 billion for clean and drinking water state revolving funds, or SRFs, over 5 years with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In this webinar, we will focus on how Oregon and Washington communities can access these funds through partnerships, project development, and technical assistance. There will be 2 breakout sessions with Oregon and Washington representatives so that you can ask state-specific questions. We will be recording this webinar and sharing it with those who aren't able to attend in real time. Also like to take a moment to say special thanks to our sponsors, Meyer Memorial Trust and Floodplains by Design. So just a quick look at our agenda. We'll do a land acknowledgement, and we'll do an introduction of our speakers. And we'll go into our breakout rooms, and then we'll do our wrap up and closing remarks. And this land acknowledgement is actually specific to Oregon, so I apologize to our Washington representatives. So we acknowledge that the Willamette River runs through the ancestral homelands, traditional village sites, and gathering areas of the Cayuse, Chinook, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Kalapuya, Cathlamet, Molalla, Multnomah, Numu, Tualatin, Wasco, Rishram, Willamette, Tumwater, and other tribes and bands of the Willamette Rivers. We want to recognize that the Willamette Valley today is a region of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, and future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. We honor the many nations of the Wilamut for being the original caretakers and protectors of these lands since time immemorial, and for passing on their teachings and lifeways through past and present generations. And then I'll also provide a labor acknowledgement, and this was provided to us by Catherine Watkins, who is a Beaverton School District educator, and it's been used at the National Education Association's Black Caucus. We pay homage to those stolen from Africa, placed in chattel bondage, forced into labor, and called slaves. They never submitted to this oppression and have always fought together with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for their forced and unpaid labor that built much of the Americas. To all our Indigenous, Asian, and African forebearers, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is through this and justice that we truly give honor. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce our first speaker. Her name is Ashley Lucht. She is the Associate Director with the State Revolving Funds Solution Team at Quantified Ventures. Ashley brings nearly 20 years of experience working with small municipalities on a variety of infrastructure investment projects. Much of her career has been spent in Vermont's Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, helping small volunteer municipal governing bodies develop their managerial and financial capacity. She focused specifically on budgeting and using rate analysis in addition to calculating non-revenue water and how to address it. Most recently, Ashley's work with Vermont Bond Bank brought her back to many of those same municipalities as they sought access to capital markets to finance their infrastructure projects. She continued to advise municipalities on budgeting and user rates, in addition to strategizing on long-term funding plans to achieve their capital planning goals. Prior to her tenure in public service, Ashley worked as a driller's helper on subsurface site investigations using a hollow stem auger and geoprobe combined drill rig. She also did hazardous waste cleanup on sites throughout New England, and we are extremely grateful to have her time this morning. And so I'd like to introduce Ashley to you all now.
Thank you, Tana. I apologize for my voice. I am in the throes of COVID right now, so appreciate your patience. So I am part of a team of former state revolving fund directors from around the country who have come together to provide expertise in accessing the state revolving loan funds to help borrowers fund green stormwater and natural infrastructure projects. Next slide. So each year, this slide is supposed to show basically how the money works. So each year, state revolving loan funds receive money from state and federal governments. These funds, along with loan repayments, make up the funds that are actually loaned out to communities, with the idea that these funds sustain themselves in perpetuity. The Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund is used to fund projects that address public health through drinking water and is limited to certain federally regulated public water systems only. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, however, can fund any project that has a water quality benefit, which I will go into a little bit later. And the CWSRF can provide funding to municipalities and private entities. However, most states still limit funding to municipalities exclusively. They haven't, many states are statutorily limited to who they can lend to. And so unfortunately, the SRFs are only open to those only municipalities, but there are ways around it. So next slide, please. Thank you. So recent updates to the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund allows for a wide range of eligibilities that have a water quality benefit, as you can see listed here. However, nationally, there is still a heavy focus on traditional gray infrastructure projects. It should be noted that what's listed above are federal eligibilities, and states may further restrict the types of funding provided through the Clean Water SRF. And as stated earlier, most states do still restrict lending to municipalities, which of course in turn limits the expanse of projects. There are some states that do allow for a municipality to be a pass-through or partner with a private borrower. And that is, I think, where the opportunity probably lies for many of those who are on the call, is to find a municipal partner to essentially, and I don't want to say sponsor with a capital S, because sponsorship in a Clean Water SRF world is its own thing, but to effectively partner with a municipality to get the funding for that natural infrastructure project. And just one note on the surface water, groundwater protection, what's also called source water protection, is some may be like, oh, drinking water, that's probably the best place, that's probably the best source of funding to go to undertake that type of project. But in reality, the Clean Water SRF is really where a borrower should look for source water protection activities. And that's really because, like I said, the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, they really restrict projects to those that have a direct public health benefit to a public water system. And source water protection is, while it is incredibly beneficial to public health, it's more disparate, and so it's harder to be like, if you do this, it equals that. So that's why the Clean Water SRF is really the best place for source water protection activities. Next slide, please. So why should we care? Well, where do I begin? So the benefit, the lovely thing about the SRFs, like I've said, is that there's a wide range of eligibilities. They also come with incredibly flexible funding terms. They are statutorily required to be below market rate. They have generous loan terms, loan payback, start of the loan payback start date is often tied to project closeout, so you don't have to start paying it back right away. And there's almost always some level of forgiveness or subsidy associated with these loans, in addition to them being sub-market or below market rates, which means they're already subsidized. Also, as you can see by the Scrooge McDuck pile of money there, that represents states and their SRF programs. Is essentially states are sitting on just piles and piles of money that are very difficult to, there are just not enough projects to get them.
Be tied to the historical gravesite, not tied to like a.
Lost my train of thought there for a sec. So many states have trouble spending all of the money that they have in their fund every year, and that frankly is piles of money. Yes, piles of money. And that is even before the bipartisan infrastructure law came through, which just sort of added like piles and piles of more money on top of the piles of money that exist. So that really provides an opportunity for those of you in the audience to think about advocating for other uses of the SRF aside from the traditional gray infrastructure projects. And kind of that's what Quantified Ventures is. That's what we're looking to help communities or borrowers do, is learn how to speak to state revolving loan programs, look at the intended use plan, kind of figure out how to get their projects noticed and then funded. Next slide, please. So now we get to why we're here. We want to encourage the use of state revolving loan funds for non-point source pollution projects. Challenges abound from a perceived lack of demand at the state level. State revolving loan funds, there's a perceived lack of demand at the state level SRFs, combined with a lack of understanding of how non-point source pollution natural infrastructure is integral to addressing stormwater pollution, for example, to no immediate or easily identifiable rate payer for the loan. States too are struggling with staffing shortages to develop projects that are outside of the "this is the way it's always been done" mode. And like I said, QV's SRF solutions team can work with entities to understand the project, navigate the state revolving loan funds, strategize on advocating for project funding, and develop tailored financing mechanisms to get the project done. And this is especially important with the kind of no built-in user base. Many SRFs are sort of built to look at kind of a traditional way of paying back loans through user rates. And many of the best natural infrastructure projects don't necessarily have a built-in user rate, like a wastewater system or a stormwater utility. So finding creative ways to show that loan can be paid back is what QV is really great at. Next slide, please. So along with the piles of bipartisan infrastructure loan money or law money that is coming is the requirement that 49% of the federal CAP grant must be provided in subsidies. AKA forgiveness. States have the ultimate discretion within these 4 categories on how to distribute that subsidy. Unfortunately, most states likely continue to subsidize the types of projects that have always received it, i.e. stormwater. But really I'm talking about traditional stormwater projects like combined sewer overflow, not the fun green stormwater infrastructure or natural infrastructure project ones that, like those of you who are on the phone are interested, or on the call are interested in undertaking. But like I said, or as seen on the screen, the additional subsidy as part of the bill can be distributed based on affordability criteria, which is outlined in which each state has discretion on how they want to determine affordability. They can provide it to stormwater projects. They can also provide it to energy or water efficiency projects. And then anything else considered sustainable. Next slide, please. So I think the ultimate question is like, how do these projects get funded? And what this slide is basically showing you is like the general overview of how a state's intended use plan cycle goes. And what the intended use plan does is it's how a state intends to spend that pile of money that it gets from the federal government, from the state match, and from revolved funds, how it plans to spend that money every year. And it's part of the public, there is a public process that that is built into the intended use plan cycle. That is where borrowers can advocate for priority ranking for some of your natural infrastructure projects, for use of subsidy to go towards natural infrastructure projects. And it's really useful. It's important to understand the cycle in order to get your projects funded. Because if you're not on the list, you can't get money. And lastly, next slide, please. So what do you do next? Well, make friends with your state's SRF team. If your state does not allow lending directly to private entities, find a municipal partner. Once you found that partner, work with them to get your project ranked on the priority list for funding, and make sure you take advantage of the public comment period built into each intended use plan cycle to advocate for green stormwater infrastructure and natural infrastructure opportunities, including targeting additional subsidy to them. QV SRF Solutions team can work with you to navigate the seemingly complex world of SRFs to find solutions to get your projects funded. Again, I apologize for my jumping around a little bit, but that's what I've got for you. I'm happy to take questions or answer questions kind of outside of this call. I will drop my contact information in the chat. And I know that those who have organized this presentation also have my contact information. So feel free to reach out. I love the SRFs. I love the power that they have and the role that they can play in kind of affecting change and not just kind of doing the way it's always been done. I think that the SRFs provide a really good opportunity for that.
Thank you so much, Ashley. As I said in the chat, no apologies. You were amazing, especially with COVID, exceptional. Welcome, everyone. My colleague, Alan, is going to put up 2 buttons for states, Washington and Oregon. We are also seeing that there are some folks from other places and wanted to make some space if you in particular had any questions. But no, to just please select either Oregon or Washington. They'll be equally good. And I'm so curious to see how Ryan and Jeff, you're going to manage the piles of money conversations to come. I love that, Ashley. Alan, are you close to ready with breakout room choices?
Yes, I am. Lizzie had mentioned like maybe given a moment if anyone has any questions, but if we're ready, I can hit the button now.
And if I may, I would love to know, Ashley, we have many colleagues on the line from across the United States and may not benefit from the insights that Ryan and Jeff are going to offer us. And I'm curious, from your opinion, what's the best way for our colleagues to access this new funding opportunity with piles of money sitting on the sideline for them to allocate this towards new green and gray infrastructure projects? Do you have any recommendations for those on the line?
Certainly familiar. I mean, it's going to seem daunting, but you could familiarize yourself with the intended use plan, but that may seem like foreign language to you. But that's where, I mean, frankly, not to sort of toot our own horn, but that's where the SRF solutions team at Quantified Ventures comes in, is we know how to read these intended use plans. We know, we frankly know many of the SRF directors throughout the state, and we can work with you to advocate for your projects. I know I sent a one-pager about the SRF solutions team to the organizing team, that they'll be sending that packet of information at the end with all of the slides, I'm presuming. And so our contact information will be in there if as you kind of go down these roads.
And
Is
if
that helpful, Lizzie?
That's really helpful. And if
Okay.
I may, one other thing I want to make sure we make clear across our participants here, we have many different sectors participating. Some are utilities, some are nonprofits and conservation partners. Do you have any suggestions before we do deep dives into Oregon and Washington for how best to each of these sectors can access these types of funds, or any recommendations on that front?
So again, this is very state specific because there are only a handful of states that allow direct lending to these private entities specifically. The best way to kind of get your project funded is to, well, one, be in if you're a private entity, like if you're a municipality, the chances of you getting your project funded, whether it be a natural infrastructure project or traditional gray infrastructure project, through the traditional intended use plan SRF funding, is pretty good. I mean, some states have better priority ranking for natural infrastructure projects than others, but I would say if you're a municipality, again, given these piles of money, the chances of your project getting funded are pretty good. If you're a private entity trying to get your project funded in a state that doesn't provide funding directly to private entities, then partnering with a municipality is your best chance of doing that, short of hard advocacy to get rules changed. But sometimes those rules are at the state level, the statutory level, and getting those rules changed is really a lengthy process. So finding a willing municipality is really the best course of action.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I can go ahead and open the rooms. One note, this is a little bit different than most breakout rooms where everybody has to self-select. So it's split into Oregon and Washington. So I'll try it now, and I'll be here to help folks get into rooms also.
Watershed protection and restoration. So we'll move on to this slide. Kind of shows our integrated process for taking applications, rating and ranking them, and distributing available funds. We have 4 fund sources: the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, Centennial Clean Water Program funding, which is a state fund. Section 319 is a federal fund source for Nonpoint source projects, and our Stormwater Financial Assistance Program. All those funds are integrated together in one application that is focused on water quality outcomes and public health protection, amongst other items I'll talk about a little bit in another slide. And we're providing assistance in the form of grants, loans, and hardship subsidy, that forgivable principal piece with the CWSRF program. And project types, we can do anything that has a water quality nexus: wastewater, Nonpoint, stormwater, and on-site sewage programs. And again, integrated application and rating ranking process, and I'll provide some dates at the end of how our cycle goes through the process. And then we generate this combined, we call it a funding offer list. It's also the IUP, the intended use plan for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program needs. Is there a question?
Jeff, I just wanted to ask if you're able to shift to presentation mode.
Oh, okay, are you seeing the 2 slides?
Yes.
Is that, would that be under display settings? Do I swap presenter?
Yes, I think so.
Let me try this.
Yep.
Is that,
That's better. Thank you.
that's better? Okay, good. I wasn't, that was a good question. I wasn't sure because I tested it earlier. So good. Okay, thank you. Yeah, otherwise you get the preview of my next slide. Okay, so, and I know there was a mention of, and I'll say it now, you know, why don't we have more non-point projects in our program? And it's really a matter of, do you have a rate base to secure a loan? And, you know, historically, non-point projects struggle to find a rate-based or a general obligation to secure a loan. So this is why we integrate, and we can provide grant or loan depending on what the applicant and what the project is. And we are integrating some new pieces to our program this year, ongoing planning, kind of pulling from what Oregon does, where they take multiple applications a year. We're opening up for planning type projects year round this next year. And we're reducing barriers for small community wastewater hardship by keeping them on the planning, design, construction loop. Once they get into our system, we're keeping them and funding their design and then their construction as they move through the process. So again, the 4 funding sources we have available: the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program, try to focus a little bit on that today, including the new bipartisan infrastructure law funds, which provide us a significant amount of additional forgivable principal, which opens up some avenues to maybe broaden what we fund and how much we fund across our priorities. And those funds are looking like, for Washington State, about $193 million over 5 years additional funds from BIL. And that's on top of about $271 million over 5 years. That is the base Clean Water State Revolving Fund capitalization grant that we get. So a significant investment into our next 5 years of funding. I will say that the funding is authorized but not appropriated. So I always have a hint of caution when talking about what funds are available, because Congress can change. Congress does not have to authorize or appropriate the same amount that's authorized in the BIL. Our cap grant this year was supposed to be 40 million and we got 20. We did get the BIL funds, an additional 31 million. So that kind of made up that reduction in the base cap grant. So it's an interesting dynamics on the appropriation side of things for sure. I'll point out that we also have Stormwater Financial Assistance Program funded by the state Model Toxics Control Act, and we've been awarding about $35 million a year in stormwater grants. We have the Centennial Clean Water Program that funds hardship wastewater subsidy, as well as non-point source activity projects. And we have then the Section 319, a relatively small pot of funds that we pull in and award those kind of with that non-point side of the Centennial Clean Water Program. And applicants and projects eligibility. Essentially, our eligibility is limited to public entities, local governments, federally recognized tribes, special purpose districts. Nonprofits, we can fund through Section 319 funding only. So it's that smallest pot of money we can fund nonprofits, and usually it's not-for-profit organizations doing riparian and non-point work that received most of that 319 funding, just because it's the only available. So the partnerships, again, is that continuing theme, partnering with a public entity gives you the broadest eligibility for funding any of these project types: wastewater, stormwater, stormwater facilities and activities, on-site septic, and non-point source. Our rating and ranking system, this is a very quick overview. You can see that it's heavily weighted on water quality and public health improvements proposed by the project, in combination with how you went through the planning, selection of the project, what partnerships you have, and readiness to proceed criteria. Is your project really ready to move forward if we provided the funding? And we're getting a lot more pressure on getting funds used quickly, expeditiously through our programs, and which doesn't always happen because of various reasons. So other factors here, but those are the primary. We do have a set aside points, 50 points for projects that are wastewater construction hardship eligible, and that's a calculation we go through based on information provided. And I'm going to kind of skip quickly over wastewater facilities, but I did want to highlight that again, that partnership opportunity that exists out there that I haven't seen it in Washington, where not-for-profits and other entities can partner with wastewater utility to perhaps not just look at a wastewater treatment facility upgrade, but maybe protecting and restoring parts of the watershed as part of a project. We can provide grant money for some of that, if it's got non-point source related work in it, or forgivable principal, and addressing a project that combines both of those, or maybe separate but sponsored, not the sponsored word necessarily, because we don't have a sponsorship program specifically like Oregon does. But if your applicant can be the public body, and you're coordinating a project with that public entity, they can secure a loan and forgivable principal loan for a project. And I will move on to stormwater facilities, where again, most of our stormwater work is being funded through our stormwater financial assistance pot of money, that state pot of money, for retrofits that address existing runoff from existing hardened surfaces, paved surfaces, impervious. And we we limit funds on the development or redevelopment side to just Clean Water State Revolving Fund alone. We don't, those projects generally, if it's a development project, don't rate so well in our system, because we're looking for a net gain in environmental improvement. Stormwater activities, again, quickly, we do fund source control related projects. That's the primary focus of stormwater activity funded projects, and a lot of high efficiency street sweepers and programs to remove more pollutants from streets before they can enter stormwater runoff and impact waterways. That's probably the primary project funded through these, as well as some identification of source pollutants and removal before, again, they can impact water quality. Non-point source activities, we're getting into probably the most interest today. Eligible for the Clean Water State Revolving Funds, Centennial, and those 319 funds. We actually set aside 20% of our SRF loan dollars every year to fund non-point source projects, which is has been more than 40 million available to those projects. So essentially a project that rates 650 points, but it's non-point, and it's willing to, the proponent's willing to take a loan for that project, it'll get funded, because we'll take that 40 million and run down our priority list and fund all the non-point projects first, and then come back up and stream the rest of our funds. We generally have not used the amount of money available there, but we've kept it in place to help promote the needs for more non-point work and natural infrastructure. So some of the examples you can read this: public education and outreach, implementation of a lot of agricultural best management practices, but a huge focus recently is on riparian protection and restoration, and trying to get more riparian buffers in place. That's a significant effort to try to incentivize that type of work into the future here. And it's also related to salmon recovery, a direct link there. And there's a second slide on Nonpoint. Again, groundwater, aquifer, and wellhead protection. We don't fund many of those, but they are eligible. Water quality monitoring, and then land acquisition has increased in recent years. So we're trying to also promote acquisition because we feel like that provides the greatest level of protection of watersheds out there, is if we can protect larger chunks of land that are in perpetuity using the SRF funds and some of our grant and forgivable resources. I think the drinking water source protection was mentioned. We've got several of those projects we've funded and in the works currently. And I wanted to touch on Green Project Reserve is an EPA term, and it relates to it's not really a set aside in the state revolving fund program, but we have to use at least 10% of our funds that address green infrastructure, energy efficiency, water efficiency, or environmentally innovative projects. And those innovative projects can include watershed protection, Nonpoint source work, stream restoration, and the like. And we did put in place years ago a 25% forgivable loan component to this Green Project Reserve category. So if a project applies for funding, a proponent applies for a project that meets one of these, they can receive 25% forgivable if they rate high enough in our list. We haven't set aside a lot of money for this, but with the additional resources, we may have more capacity for that. This list that we'll publish at the end of June for this year has a $6 million forgivable part to a large, I think it's a Kennewick wastewater project that's doing energy efficiency upgrades. So we do award it to high priority projects that meet these categories. Some example projects, I kind of squeezed a lot on this one slide, so I apologize for that. But I know we had kind of limited time, and I haven't timed myself, so Cass can tell me when to stop. I mentioned land acquisitions. We're really trying to promote that as a path forward with especially the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan program. And this last year, the Nisqually tribe completed an acquisition of about 1,200 acres of property in the upper Nisqually watershed that also helped facilitate an additional 960 acre award to Nisqually Land Trust, who was a partner with the tribe. Again, that partnership made the difference here. So Nisqually could secure the loan with their enterprise fund and acquire the property through that. And it used about half of a $14 million award we have in place, about $6.5 million, I think this 1,200 acres was. And so they have the opportunity to procure additional property before that loan expires in another year or so. Another project we funded in recent, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, was the Skagit PUD drinking water source protection. That project was procuring land from Weyerhaeuser to protect source water inlet for serving 63,000 customers. So significant public health improvement in that project application. That project rated, I think, one of the highest projects on our list the year we awarded that. They also received a $1.5 million total loan, but 400,000 forgivable. So they got that 25% forgivable principal for that source protection project. We have a similar one in El Waco going through right now that has both loan and forgivable or centennial grant possibly, which we use interchangeably sometimes for those projects. And then Squalicum Creek stream restoration, that was an urban restoration, a significant project in the city of Bellingham that took out about 3.6 million in loan and received some additional grant dollars that we provided. And that was a combined project that addressed both stormwater and significant restoration of 10 acres of riparian and wetland habitat. That's a cool project. We don't get a lot of those though, you know, looking for a loan. It's always that looking for grant money based on not having the ability to secure a loan with some kind of rate or general obligation funding. Spokane Conservation District is their direct seed local loan program. That was one of our first local loan programs we established, where we provide Spokane CD requests a loan from us and we provide them the loan. They're able to secure the loan because they have a tax base that they have a taxable authority. So if a conservation district has taxable authority, they could take out SRF loan. And so since the 1990s, we've been working with them on that program. About 25 million in SRF loan to date so far, and converting tilled land to no-till. And it's basically an equipment purchase program for landowners, farmers, agricultural producers to convert from tillage, which has heavy water quality impacts, to this direct seed, where it leaves the stubble in place in the ground and holds the soil, and has significant improvements also for energy efficiency, fewer runs of tractors, and I don't remember all the details, but there's some good write-ups out there on the benefits of that program. And
Jeff,
yes,
there's a couple questions that have popped up.
Okay.
One from Will, if you could speak to the actions that would be allowable under a TMDL support loan, and the particular, is it planning and analysis? Is that eligible? Ibrahim also had a question.
Okay.
I think we might need clarification, but maybe start with Will.
Yeah, if someone requests SRF loan for any water quality project from planning to implementation, and they're willing to take a loan for that, yes, that's eligible. Some of those projects can be funded through our Nonpoint grant program, so often they go there. But some of the focus, a large focus, is on actual implementation, so we don't fund as much upfront kind of TMDL development work, but it is eligible.
I think the last slide is going to be of keen interest to folks. Jeff, are you game if people have further questions about how different entities financed parts of these to be contacted by individuals?
Oh yeah, I have a slide with all the contacts
Okay.
at the end for sure. That's definitely wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so then people can call my staff, and then I get fewer calls.
Perfect.
I don't
And
know time wise where we're at.
The other question was answered. We have time, at least 5 more minutes, so please go on.
Okay. I just wanted to do a shout out to our on-site septic repair and replacement program. This slide was over a year old, I think, but it shows that essentially we've grown our on-site septic repair and replacement program from a point where it was a local loan program with individual loans to different counties, county health districts, and they were trying to run their own local loan program. And we had some major set of meetings to talk about efficiencies and reducing barriers to that. And the risk of having defaults on loans was significant, and health districts aren't lenders. So we basically moved this program up to its current place, where now it's funded as a statewide program, and we're getting signatures to the MOU for that program from all counties. And Craft 3 is our partner in this. So the group applies for funds when they need additional resources, both Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Centennial or Forgivable, depending on what we use for the hardship component. And Craft 3 is that a lender, nonprofit community development bank institution. I guess they don't call it a bank, but they're our kind of private partner in managing all the loans and now statewide for that program. And you can see we've at the point a year ago.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully you were able to ask some of your state-specific questions to Ryan and Jeff. My name is Lizzie Marsters, and I just wanted to thank you all for coming today and thank my colleagues for pulling it together. We really had three aims, and I hope you understood that through these conversations. One, that this is a really unique opportunity at the moment, that we really want to, as these federal funds are coming through Congress, how do we set up our project teams in Oregon and Washington to access this type of funding? We know there's a huge urgency, both from an infrastructure perspective, but also in terms of addressing climate change, our environmental degradation, and ensuring that our communities have access to the outdoors. We believe this is an opportunity to unite these types of work and access this type of funding for your projects and communities. The key here is how do we elevate and increase partnerships for utilities, nonprofits, land trusts, watershed councils to work together towards these types of outcomes and to access this types of funding and financing. As you heard, you have Quantified Ventures, who has the expertise to help access and elevate these types of projects. But I also want to say that on this call, you have Tana with Nesika Wilamut, who can help facilitate and build up this type of network. You have Cass from Bonneville Environmental Foundation and Floodplains by Design, who has been an incredible resource for the Willamette River Network in the past. And I'm Lizzie Marsters, Environmental Finance Manager, and we can help you think through the sourcing and sequencing of these types of funds. Obviously, Ryan and Jeff are your state experts in terms of accessing these types of funds. Success to me would look like in the coming years that we have new partnerships, new projects in this pipeline that can access this type of funding, and we are showcasing these green-gray infrastructure projects in Oregon and Washington. So just wanted to thank everyone for coming. If you have any follow-up questions, please put them in the chat or email us directly. We really appreciate your participation on this call.